All right, so welcome everyone to the biweekly SES status update. Today is July 8th. We're here with the team of Chaos Labs. Chaos Labs has been a part of the SES Incubation Program, and they have been working with a number of maker teams to improve the testing and security infrastructure of the DAO. So they already did a number of status updates in the past. We'll link to those in the information that we'll release. But today we're at the point where the concept of the core unit can be presented in full. So Ben, why don't you take it away?
Sure. No, thank you, Robert. It's been a pleasure to be part of SES, and we're excited to come present to you all and talk about what we're doing. So without further ado, we'll dive in. So the agenda today, right, is kind of talk about Chaos Labs. We'll introduce ourselves and the core unit, talk about some of the details of the proposal at a high level, and start generating feedback on that. And then I think one of the core pieces of today's presentation will be a product demo of what we've been working on with the SideStream team before closing out with Q&A. So diving into the company background, Chaos Labs, if you are not familiar and haven't watched the prior updates, is a platform for economic security testing, right? The mission of the company is to secure blockchains and protocols through robust agent and scenario-based simulations. So allowing people to understand the long-term impacts of the code they're writing, the parameters they're setting via, real on-chain data. The team is about 20 now internally, with a wide-ranging experience from, top technical companies as engineers, tech leads, and product people, as well as, crypto native experience like Masari. So it's a killer team that is ripe to be building this. And so what does that mean? A lot of the questions that we get is around what is economic security and why is it so important? Is it just the same as, security audits and penetration testings? And my answer to that is no, right? Because historically, right, a lot of hacks were vulnerabilities found in the code, right? It was issues that were found because of, a lack of expertise or, flaws or lack of diligence, right? The expected hacks that you see here, right? Someone just attacks the victim and gets money out. But what we've seen over the past 18 months is really more sophisticated attacks that manipulate the environment around a protocol, right? They are breaking oracles, they're doing MEV, right? They're taking advantage of volatile markets and utilizing that to actually take funds or manipulate the outputs of a victim protocol. And that's not really able to be determined just by reading the code, right? You need to actually run the code and the protocol through simulations to understand how it will react in adversarial environments in a probabilistic basis, right? So what do we do to actually, protect against that, mitigate that risk, and help people understand it? Is we've built a platform that allows you to instantly replicate the state of the chain in a custom environment for testing, right? So what you do with the Chaos platform is you actually run a simulation based on a fork of live protocol data. So if you hit run, which Omer will show you here in a bit, of a simulation, you're forking the code base of the given protocol at that point in time or at a specified block height. So you're taking live account balances, you're taking prevailing mainnet code, integrations, right? And then you're simulating what the impact of certain environmental changes would be, right? It might be changes in Oracle prices, increase in gas fees, latency and flash loans. It's a way to actually test, parameter setting, new code, new mechanisms with real live data and see it flow throughout the code, right? So you can think about like the auction team, right? Thinking about how are they auctioning off DAI and what does that mean in the market based on, prevailing prices, based on Oracle data, based on liquidity available elsewhere, but also based on kind of the lending market, right? And what does contagion risk actually look like? One of our core, motives around the company is that the best simulation environment is as close to production as possible, right? So giving people in teams and engineers the ability to test with an environment that's as close to what they would see in real time and allow them to understand the vulnerabilities, the attack vectors, but also the edge cases that they need to protect against. And so this is like any code that you're using in the Chaos platform is basically like live and reproducible on mainnet. You don't have to change anything. You don't have to create any adapters, right? You can take what you're developing for MakerDAO on mainnet, plug it into the Chaos system and test it, tweak it, and then just deploy that from there, right? So So that's Chaos Labs. The key personnel that you need to know, right? So I'll let Omer give his brief introduction, and then I can talk about myself and Max as well.
Hey guys, I'm Omer. Background is in startups for a few years in the developer infrastructure space before joining Facebook in 2017. Spent a little over 2 years working on internet.org, a project where we were building internet infrastructure for emerging markets. Later relocated back to New York City, where I was the tech lead for videos on Facebook Lite. Facebook Lite's a version of Facebook also optimized for emerging markets with several 100 million monthly active users, mostly working on the video stack there. Then the last role was as a tech lead at Instagram, where I led commerce ads for feed and stories. So that's just like any tagged product that you see. Most of my time there was spent working on infrastructure. Been in crypto since 2013, originally Bitcoin, 2016, more Ethereum, smart contract security and auditing, and left Instagram a year and a half ago to start Chaos.
And I'm Ben O'Neill. I run all of the business side of the house here at Chaos. I spent the last 3.5 years helping build up Masari as one of the earliest business hires, leading back-end ops and finance to front-end sales, fundraising, partnerships, and the like. Neither of us will be taking an income or being paid by Chaos. That's not the point of kind of our roles. Our role is to be on the Chaos Lab side of this core unit. Max fortunately couldn't join us today, but he's, I think a lot of people in this group will know Max Glass. He's been an active participant in real world assets, generating ideas of how to grow MakerDAO, but also has been an early supporter of Chaos Labs from the beginning. He was in the incubation program with Omer when he was generating the idea of Chaos Labs, and kind of really understands the product and how the value it can bring, right? And so for us, we wanted to bring in a facilitator that was not part of the company, but really had MakerDAO's best interest at heart and would keep the company honest in what we're developing. And so based on his, engagement with MakerDAO, his understanding of Chaos Labs, we thought he was a great person to potentially lead this for us, and you'll be able to learn more about that in his facilitator MIP that'll be coming out shortly as well. So the Chaos Labs core unit. Our goal as a core unit is to facilitate MakerDAO entering a new era of technological and economic complexity. And our mission there is to provide a future-proof blockchain testing platform and services that will enable it to continue building products with best-in-class and easy-to-display security. In practice, this is twofold, right? This is building tooling for other core units, right, to make their jobs more efficient and more effective, but also building the same tooling in a very verifiable and transparent way for the community to understand how these tests are occurring, how decisions are being made, and what data goes into that. At its core, our goal is to not be a core unit publicly facing, replacing the other core units' work, right? If you think about risk, you think about smart contracts, protocol engineering, oracles, our goal is to support them, right? Our goal is to allow them to be more sophisticated in the work that they're doing because of the ability to use a tooling that we're more or less custom building for them. And so one of the very top concerns that has come about, like in my research of the core unit process, but also kind of in the feedback we've gotten privately, is why should Chaos Labs be a core unit versus a vendor? And this is something that we'll talk about throughout this presentation, but there's a couple reasons that really jump out. One, MakerDAO is very complicated, right? It doesn't rip and replace the code base, it just expands it, right? And so as a vendor, we'd be incentivized to minimize the work that we put into MakerDAO and maximize the margin, versus a core unit, we would have dedicated resources to helping really understand the nuances, the complexity, and the edge cases that will come up with MakerDAO, right? It will also allow for deeper expertise between both the Chaos Labs, right, product and simulation engine, and the needs of MakerDAO, right? So that you can actually make that bridge to create a more sophisticated environment that's useful for all of those relevant parts. Additionally, unified versus separated budgets, right? If we're a vendor, that means anytime somebody wants to utilize something that we're building, they'll have to go back to the MakerDAO community, file a new MIP, and receive budget, versus becoming a core unit in and of ourselves. Like every new core unit that either is already existing but hasn't been using Chaos Labs, or new core units that get approved down the road, as well as new community initiatives, would all be baked into this price, right? So that this would be a kind of set fee for functionality across the ecosystem, that we would be flexible and adjustable to whatever the community needs. One example of kind of where these things fit is the SideStream auction team asked us to help build a model to simulate the recent addition of our ETH auctions before it goes live. As we started diligencing it and really diving into understanding how that works, we recognized that we would need input and implications from across the variety of different core units, from risk, smart contracts, oracles, auctions, and more, right? So as a vendor, we would just build something narrowly suited for SideStream, which might not actually get them the answers they want. As a core unit, we can work with all these different other core units to make sure that we're building a system that can test our ETH for all of their relevant outputs to understand that risk, but also like put the effort and investment in to move that upstream, so that that's not a simulation they're running after the fact of approval, but earlier on in the approval process. I've also linked at the bottom here a response from Wilder during the Immunified core unit proposal process that that really exemplified the difference between a vendor and a core unit, and can add insights to how we think about that. But we'll also come up with more posts over the next couple of months, kind of around our thinking here. So clicking through, we go. The key objectives of the core unit are to integrate forward-looking simulations into all technical maker governance proposals for added clarity, right? We want to be able to provide more sophisticated technical and data forward understanding to the community of the impacts of a lot of the changes being discussed and voted on, right? So that we can have one source of testing and simulations to understand the value of different options and opportunities put forth by the core units or the community at large, right? We obviously want to onboard all relevant core units into the simulation engine and kind of use that to determine a holistic roadmap for community prioritization, right? And then step that into a maker tailored simulation environment, right? Where we can support all of these core units in something that is not off the shelf, but it's custom built into what MakerDAO needs. And lastly, kind of the holy grail in my mind of what this becomes is a unified economic testing infrastructure for developers and community members. And I'll dive into that a bit more here in a moment. So forward-looking simulations and integrating them into technical maker governance. What does that actually mean? It means the spell process can be actually simulated out on a multi-block time frame, so that there's a standard format of testing and output. You can think about what you would see in a CI/CD as a developer in GitHub. You can think about what Uniswap has rolled out with their seatbelt product, right? But actually being able to deploy a unified testing framework for any new protocol change that will allow the community and other core units to really understand their impacts. You can see here a mock-up of kind of what that actually looks like in practice in the Chaos Labs product. Number 2 and 3, I wanted to combine into one slide, but because it's really onboarding all of the core units as is needed, and then using that to propose a holistic roadmap to the community, right? As tooling expands and visibility and transparency increases, we want to make sure that the right voices are being heard and the right priorities are being taken under consideration for the maximum benefit of the protocol at large, right? Every core unit will have its own needs, but we want to make sure that those are scalable and useful across them, right? So if you're building agents for keepers, agents for kicks, for flaps, and the like, can they be utilized across core units so that they don't need to be rebuilt from the ground up for each one? Again, like kind of touching on like the number of core units involved in the collateral onboarding process. How do you build a holistic simulation environment for them, right? And lastly, jumping into that, right? Through the SES program, we've been working really closely with SideStream. And Omer, please jump in if you have anything to say here. But we've been working with them over the last couple of months in understanding how to build the product to best suit their needs, right? To maximize the impact of the product in how they're operating and how they're thinking about auctions and liquidation mechanisms, right? So they've been utilizing the API for the majority of the year to actually integrate that into their front end. And we just recently got them access to the front end product as well as it's come to market, right? And so we started working much closer with them to developing more simulations to better understand kind of their needs in the Maker protocol at large, right? So some of the simulations that Omer will walk through will be the flapper surplus auction, the liquidations for certain assets, and then a variety of price change scenarios that they can actually, manipulate and change. Omer, I'll pause there if you have anything that you'd like to add.
Yeah, I'm gonna elaborate on the sidestream collaboration during the demo. But just to set the stage for that, this was the unit that we identified that could benefit immediately from having a simulation staging environment early on. And the majority of the year here was spent really understanding what are the tools and infrastructure that we can build in order to integrate deeply into the development environment. And then everything you're going to see today is the fruits of that labor. So once we understood what, in direct communication with the team, what are the scenarios and simulations which are valuable, what are the things that are top of mind for that unit, we were able to build it and utilize the underlying simulation infrastructure. That's what we're going to review today. And the idea here is to be a little bit creative and imagine how other units, other teams can utilize this type of technology moving forward.
Awesome. And so for our last, key focal point, right? It's a unified economic testing infrastructure. So what this means is that allowing core units to understand how each other are operating, right? So that if you're the risk core unit and you're running simulations, can the auction or Oracle core unit see those simulations and see a differentiated output that is going to impact them, right? And if it's something that is going into public consumption, can the community also have a standardized output of those simulations as well? Right. So it's building this infrastructure so that it's not operating in silos, but you're allowing the different core units to run simulations, run economic testing, and see how it impacts the protocol at large. And again, like the goal here is to support these core units. Like we don't want to replace the risk team, but we want to be able to augment and make what they're doing more efficient and more powerful by utilizing these tools, right? And so all this data will be available in standardized outputs on our front end, but also via API, CI/CD, and varieties of other integration mechanisms to integrate into their processes and products that they're already maintaining.
I'll just add to that on the testing infrastructure slide, but if you can go back. So this is one of the things that I want to emphasize is in our initial interviews with all the CU units, one of the things that we immediately stumbled upon was that each technical team had a different process for testing their changes. And as Ben alluded to earlier, when code bases get large, this was one of the bigger issues that we had at Instagram and Facebook. There needs to be alignment on how you're testing things, because usually testing comes with a set of assumptions. The more assumptions you make, the further you deviate from what you're going to expect to see in production. And when people are pushing code in varying parts of the ecosystem of the protocol, that's just a recipe for disaster. So the idea here is, can we build an underlying testing infrastructure that can be shared across all of the Maker units and actually serve as a source of truth before we push immutable code to the chain?
Moving on, right? So we wanted to highlight kind of some of the key use cases, right, for economic testing, right? And this feeds into Alpro's question about, can we simulate improving the maker's internal capital efficiency, suggestibility PPs, and perhaps in the near future incentives? Yes, right? Any actions that are being taken on chain, you should be able to simulate their impact based on agent scenario-based simulations, right? Understanding how you expect people to react based on historical heuristics and deterministic incentives. You should be able to test and see what you should expect that impact and that reaction in the market to be based on probabilistic curves, right? So not determining every piece of it, but randomizing parts of the simulation to understand in which ways it works and which ways it doesn't, and how you actually can take, informative outputs from that, right? So some of the things that we flagged were contagion testing, new feature configuration, collateral onboarding, auction liquidation mechanisms, Oracle manipulation, and black swan event testing. So those are the low-hanging fruit that are obvious to us. But yes, internal capital efficiency, capital deployment, what we call incentive optimization, is definitely something that we've been working on this product to be able to do, and can continue to optimize with the community at large. And then for the community, right? It's not just for the core units, right? The spell integrations that we talked about, public simulation output dashboards, agent action logs that we'll touch on through the demo, and then enhance visibility into the key change trade-offs. And like I know there's been conversation about the Maker shutdown mechanism. How do you test for that? How do you know how it's going to be deployed and what the reaction is going to be? How do you actually better understand in different environments what that's going to look like, right? Those are all things that we can plug in and actually be able to simulate in the future. And so, right, so the timeline and budget. And so the timeline, right, we wanted, like, based on the current market environment and based on kind of what we've seen in the community at large, we wanted to start this process early, right? So we're planning to, we're running through this deck and this presentation, and then we plan to actually publish the MIPS and kind of more documentation in the coming weeks, right? In the month of July, right? And leading that into an hour-long public demo of the product, understand, like, deeper Q&A, like very focused on what the community, what the core units can expect from the product and the tooling in and of itself sometime in August. So we want to use the next 6 to 8 weeks before the formal submission to really get feedback, really get an understanding of what the needs of the core units in the community are, and iterate on the MIPS and the expectations therein. So that is pretty much our number one goal as a company over the next couple of months, is really to dive into this with the community and the other core units and make sure that we are building the most useful product possible for them. Right, as we get approved, that's when the work really obviously begins in publishing more detailed roadmap specifications and integrations into things like the risk team's dashboards, right? And being able to actually deploy simulations into their front end, right? And actually being able to make a lot of this available to the community and to understand them. And so from that, the budget cap requested. What you'll see here is kind of 3 stages. In working with SES, we kind of did them in, at launch in October versus, at the beginning of next year versus mid next year. I think all of these timelines can be adjusted based on the market, based on usage, based on, if we're living up to our expectations and our promises here. But our initial budget cap is really set in this initial October column here, right? Where it's a facilitator plus 2 engineers in the core unit, and then, the entire Chaos Labs team kind of through that software expense. Right? The way that we think about this is that, similar to a large enterprise having a Salesforce engineering team to support their organization, the core unit is basically an internal MakerDAO unit optimizing the Chaos Labs infrastructure to the needs of MakerDAO, right? And so what does that look like? Like, when I spent a lot of time last night thinking about this, and what it was is that, like, the core unit is taking, resources from not only Chaos Labs, but also kind of from the core unit itself via MakerDAO, or so from MakerDAO itself via the core unit team, to actually create something that's very useful for the other core units in the community, right? So it is, like, I think Salesforce, Oracle, right, those types of, large enterprise SaaS engagements are the right way to think about this type of core unit structure, in which there's a large underlying core product team that goes into that software expense. But then you've got forward deployed engineers that are paid by Chaos Labs, and a core unit team that are paid by MakerDAO that will actually support the products at large, right? And what we're asking for here is really this CL team, and this software subscription covers all of this. And so happy to dive into that more, like, as we publish the MIPS and the budgets and all that. And happy to really kind of iterate on this with the community deeper. And so, with no further ado, I'll stop sharing, and I'll hand over to Omer to actually walk through the product and actually see the power of some of these simulations and what you can do with them.
Thank you, Ben. Let me set up the screen share here. Perfect. There we go. Can you see my screen? Can you guys see it? Ben, is my screen visible to you? Yeah?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Perfect. All right, cool. So we're going to run through this quickly. What we're showing here right now is the platform, how SideStream, the core unit, has access to it. Now, for SideStream, their unit that's focused on building an application to help auction off bad debt within Maker. And for them, they need to make sure that all of this debt can indeed be auctioned, regardless of how volatile a market is, or how new an asset is, or how many or how little positions might be open for a given asset. So what you can see here in the simulations view is a view which details the different simulations which have been configured for them. So the first one that we did was actually configure a Black Thursday type of situation where the price of Ethereum was rapidly declining. They basically specified what they needed to happen here. We were able to set it up for them. You can see here agents. So here there's a keeper that's actively monitoring all the different vaults, looking for vaults that can be liquidated. A scenario. This is where the price is actually dropped. So in Chaos, there's a differentiation between agents that behave like any externally owned account on any chain, and scenarios which are more like macro changes to the blockchain environment. These macro changes include the ability to configure and control the price of oracles or the return value of oracles in the context of a simulation. So what you can see here is that this scenario targets the Maker Oracle. It's using the Ethereum token, gives it an initial price, and you can pick a function which describes the movement of the price throughout the simulation. And then lastly, for like any testing framework, you can set assertions that are being tested at the end of a simulation. Here, we're simply checking that we want to verify that a given ilk was barked at. So here we're going to see that at the end of the simulation, the vault for ETH was barked. Lastly, you can create observers. So observers allow you to view and track different pieces of state within the protocol throughout the simulation. Here we have 2 observers. So we can click into simulation results and see what that looks like. Let's scroll here, look for a Black Thursday simulation. And what you have here is the metadata for the simulation, and these are actually the observers. So this simulation was run. It took 2,500 blocks. And what the observers that we had set up here was an observer for number of active auctions for ETH. So this is kind of a time series, and it makes sense that as time is going on, is moving forward, and the price of ETH is being dropped, we're seeing the number of auctions incrementally go up. And then this is the amount of ETH that's available for purchase, so on and so forth, based on the request that they had. And all of these observers are very easy to add once you know what pieces of state you want to track. This is a single simulation. More recently, we've been working with SideStream on flapper simulations. So flapper simulations are simply, these tend to have like funny names, but just for kind of make sure that we're all on the same page, flapper is just a surplus auction. So these are auctions that are used to basically auction off a fixed amount of surplus DAI in the system for MKR. It's a state that's kind of hard to replicate in testing. There's a lot of things that you need to manipulate, but they need to make sure that the SideStream portal works for this as well. So that was the request. The kind of technically, for anybody familiar with the Maker protocol, this involved kind of a lot of different modules to write and to be able to customize for. The end result, though, is that they have now a simulation that and access to an RPC node that they can connect to that has a flapper simulation ready for them. They have agents set up, assertions and scenarios, and SideStream now, in addition to being able to trigger the simulations from the UI, can connect to this through an RPC URL where they can now connect their front-end application to our cloud and see that everything is working as intended. I see that we're running a little bit over time. So also happy to open the floor for QA. And just a reminder for anybody who's technical, obviously we're more than happy to answer any questions post this session, but also I'll set a reminder for the hour-long QA that we have coming up in August, which we'd love to see you guys. Yeah, I'll leave it open, I'll hand it over back to Ben and open it for Q&A.
Yep. Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
So you can see our beautiful faces. Yeah, so I mean that's where we're at. So we I think a couple major next steps on our part is one that we'll be publishing a lot of the documentation in the forums hopefully in about 2 weeks. In the back half of July, and then we are planning to do an hour-long, just full product-based presentation, demo, and Q&A with the community and anyone that wants to join in early August. So if you have any questions that are not answered in this call, please, in the forum replies to our post, in DMs in the forum, please don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, we can dive into into Q&A. So we'll start from the top, from El Pro asking about Max's experience and kind of role as a facilitator. I think number one is to be a communicator. And a kind of the man kind of like primarily considering MakerDAO as part of Chaos Labs is product development and iteration, and working closely with the other core units to determine what those decisions are, right? So parameter recommendations for managing risk. If the risk team asks us to step in and handle a lot more of that, I think that'd be a conversation that we could staff accordingly to. But I also want to make sure that we're not becoming redundant to the other core units, right? I don't want to be looked at as a threat to the risk team. I don't want to look at it like as redundant work to them. Our goal is to build technical infrastructure to better support them and allow them to become more granular in their analyses. And so something like the parameter setting, I would believe that would fall into the risk team's purview and not on ours. And here's Max. Max, if you want to opine here, would be great.
Yeah, sure. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Obviously, great question. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, so growth, I think I do understand growth, as I've been focused on growth, specifically growth driven by the onboarding of real world assets. Risk is a new area for me, and so I'm going to spend a lot of time learning, and learning is part of the experience of being in MakerDAO. So I think you can just count on me to be picking everybody's brain and understanding what matters most internally in terms of risk mitigation, and of course the folks at Chaos Labs are the ones who have been thinking a lot about risk mitigation and have clearly put together a remarkable suite of tools to simulate risk and reduce it.
Thanks, Max. And I'll just add on top of that the goal here for us is to, again, not to be the sole owner of risk. If that's something that the community asks us to do, we're happy to do that. We do that for other protocols. But here it's more about building the underlying cloud infrastructure to empower the community as a whole. Not only empowering the developers, but also putting on a really big emphasis on verifiability. So currently, if you look at risk in DeFi, it's opaque, it's complex to understand, and it's usually delegated to a few galaxy brain types who we just trust to make decisions. They tell, an example is like moving a collateral factor for a given asset from like 5.8 to maybe 6.2 or reverse. We don't really understand why. So here, kind of different than that, our infrastructure is focused on making everything verifiable. You can see all of the agents that we're running. You'll be able to see all the scenarios that we're playing with. Those will be open source. And this was just, the goal here is to build the underlying infrastructure to help the community make more informed decisions. And every core unit can adopt that to whatever need they have, whether it's potentially a risk unit who wants to run robust simulations, or the Oracle team who's tinkering with a new implementation and wants to test it before going live, or a side stream, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so we can move on to the next question from El Pro again, asking, like, I'll just quote it here: if I understand it correctly, the Salesforce example, the financial modeling and simulation platform can be monetized to other blockchain orgs. I'm going to share my screen again, just because I think this is like the best way to really understand how to think about it, right? Is that there is work that's going to be done bespoke for MakerDAO, right? And what that means is that there are agents like keepers, right? Like the auction mechanisms that we're going to build specifically for MakerDAO, right? So you can think about that, like to maintain that Salesforce example, the plugins to your internal infrastructure, right? There's no one else that uses MakerDAO's infrastructure. And that's what we want to build to make sure that MakerDAO can get the most out of this underlying system that will be monetized, to institutions, other protocols, and you name it, that we're going to continue to build on. But what we want, and if that was all that we were coming to MakerDAO with, right, we wouldn't be coming in as a core unit, right? That wouldn't make sense. That would be very much a vendor type engagement where it's like, here's something off the shelf, good luck, and go use it. But what we want to do is customize that for MakerDAO specifically. So yeah, I would think about this core product team building the kind of generalizable solution that we monetized and sold and used across the industry. But what the Chaos Labs core unit team, the 4 deployed engineers, will be really customizing that to MakerDAO specifically. in throughout the SES program and a lot of conversations with Wilder here, all of that will be like externally verifiable, right? You'll be able to actually look at the code of the agents. You'll be able to look at the agent logs. You'll be able to actually look at everything that's going on under the hood, so that it's not a trust us, this is what the output is, but you can actually go look at all the code that's being run in the simulation, right? So we want it to be like everything that's built for MakerDAO is going to be exceptionally verifiable, very viewable, and very transparent, but customized to the needs of the core units and not determined but based on Chaos Labs. Omer, anything else that you want to add there?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and give a little bit of perspective from the engineering point of view. So, I mean, similar to Instagram and a lot of other protocols, Maker is in a league of its own in terms of how much basically capital is flowing through the system, whether it's the MKR token itself or DAI, which is a backbone of almost every DeFi protocol. The risk here is very large, and the idea is that we want to have 100% test coverage on every single flow within the application. Now, that test coverage, again, it can be customized from stochastic simulations that try to deal with the probability of things happening on mainnet and how to protect against those, but also deterministic. With anything you can think of, sanity, end-to-end testing, integrations, especially as new features, spells, and governance changes come into effect. So that's one thing. The other thing is infrastructure is not, and testing infrastructure specifically, it's not nice to have, it's a must-have, especially in an industry that's growing as fast as DeFi. So the competition amongst stablecoins is growing every day, and right now, everybody who's developing or keeping track of the development lifecycle within Maker knows that it's not the easiest protocol to contribute to. But with testing infrastructure, the idea is that we can increase the confidence of changes before they are being deployed to production, and then overall enable Maker to move faster with stable infrastructure. So these are so I also see it as first of all, there's a security point of view and just making sure that everything works. But longer term, it's also something that should enable the protocol to move faster, adapt to market changes, and be a competitive advantage.
Yep.
Yeah, the other thing I would like to emphasize is the discussion we've had about open source, right? So the source code that the core unit would be producing would be available as open source code. This wasn't your original model, but maybe you can talk a little bit about how you tweaked that.
Absolutely. So internally, one of the biggest challenges in doing any of this is you can run a script on your local machine. You can use Hard Hat or the new Rust framework that the guys at Paradigm are doing that I always forget the name. This is not novel, right? What's novel about the Chaos Cloud is the ability to run these at scale and the ability to pull off tools off the shelf that help you configure and control any part of the chain. Now, that's kind of the goal, and that's the power of the platform. Now, initially, we had our own kind of internal forked implementation and kind of internal language that would allow us to rapidly iterate and create these simulations. However, A, this wasn't user-friendly. B, it would require that we would open up a lot of our internal infrastructure in order to be verifiable. And for us, what does verifiable mean? We really want to move away from a model that some of the other players in the space are working with, where a lot of things are kind of done in a black box model, and they simply come out and say, hey, this is how you should be setting parameters. These are the safeguards that should be put in place. We ran an experiment and trust us. So we want to be able to provide the community. It actually changed the technical roadmap to be able to support all of the popular tooling that's used today in development. So we currently support Hard Hat. Anything that would run in Truffle and Ganache can run in our cloud. What that means is for any of the engineering teams that are currently working in Maker, there's 0 to none kind of ramp up time because we're using all the most popular tools in the industry. And this also means that this eliminates the trust. So we can open source exactly what all the agents that are running, all of the scenarios which are configured. If you go into our GitHub, you can see that the code, for example, for controlling Chainlink oracles, Uniswap time-weighted average price oracles are all open source. And the power of the platform comes in the orchestration of the environment. So really creating these black swan events, but also running them at scale. So yeah, you can fork Hard Hat on your machine and run it for your few blocks, but good luck trying to run it 100,000 simulations that require compute. good luck trying to build all of these tools. And that's where really the power of the platform comes in. So we want it to be in the software and the ability to kind of have a lot of compute on demand and not in the black box model where it's kind of, locked in. And I think that this is in conversations with Wouter, obviously very much in the ethos and spirit of Web3, but specifically in Maker that takes decentralizations, transparency, and verifiability very seriously.
Yeah, thank you for that. There were two other questions that maybe I can talk a little bit about. So one is about the endgame plan, which is a proposal from Rune to restructure the DAO with a lean core, and then move as much as possible of the core unit infrastructure to MakerDAO, so which would work as a kind of subsidiary. So the question is, if this plan would continue, would this core unit then work under a MetaDAO rather than as a MakerDAO core unit? And yeah, I think that really depends on the details of what is supposed to be a MetaDAO and what is supposed to go into the core. It's like this, the service that you're offering, I think, is very much a plugin. It's not part of the operational core infrastructure. Rather, it is an add-on that enables better testing, greater security, and better verifiability. So by those criteria, I believe that it would make sense to have that as part of a MetaDAO. So I think that's the first question, and then the second question is not entirely clear to me, but it asks whether it would whether it would allow Deco to develop fixed rate lending functionality virtually rather than in a sandbox. And for this, we should clarify what is meant by a sandbox. So the Deco team is currently developing a module that would offer fixed rate lending as a product built on top of the Maker protocol. And they're very much working in a separate environment that has a very small and strictly defined integration point with the MakerDAO core protocol, which helps them to work as a separate team because this module has specific permissions, and the core engineers, they would just verify that these specific restricted permissions stay within certain limits, and then the team can work very much independently. So reinterpreting the question a little bit, I guess would make sense to talk about how teams that are building like external modules to MakerDAO can use this testing infrastructure to help the integration, to make integrating easier, but most of all more secure, I believe.
100%, right? And I think that if I'm understanding virtually as basically allowing them to do it within our cloud, which is running a fork of the blockchain, then yes, that's exactly what it's meant to do, right? So if you're any of the core units, anyone building within the MakerDAO ecosystem, you should be able to basically build it in the Chaos Cloud, right? You can kind of think about that like an Alchemy specified node, but with specified states of chain, right? So that you can actually, and then you can have other core units monitoring the work that they're doing via those observables that Omer showed, right? So if they're supposed to stay within a certain realm of liquidations, of AUM or whatever, right, they can have their own observables in that kind of environment that they're developing within to understand those risks, right? And they can deploy that code and simulate it out based on the current state of the chain. So yes, I think Deco should be able to continue to develop, iterate, and test this using real world data and not have to do it in a sandbox or in a test net without, true account balances and, external code.
Yeah, and the way I see it is that I don't see a reason to drop the sandbox model, because that is just good engineering practice to separate the module as much as possible and clearly define the integration interface. But what they could do, for example, is provide a lot more transparency and verifiability about the behavior of the black box, and publish those tests, for example, on the platform. And that should open up yeah, the ability for the maker community to have more, to have a better understanding of what the behavior of the module is, and have greater confidence that it's not doing anything that it's not supposed to do. So with that, maybe move on to the last question. So El Pro is asking, will you be able to take off-chain modeling and provide granular data one day? How do you plan on expanding your tooling as the paradigm of MakerDAO changes? And if I may add something to that, especially L2, I believe, is the obvious question there. So yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So I'll answer the question for my best understanding, and feel free to kind of point me in the right direction in the comments if I'm missing anything. So I mean, layer 2s today, we already support today any layer 2 that's EVM compatible. So if that's the question, yes, this allows for that. Off-chain modeling, the way that I interpret this is basically the financial optimization of parameters in the protocol, which are done off-chain. If that is correct, then we already do that today. So that's kind of very, very similar to the type of work we do with DYDX. Obviously, the current version of DYDX isn't completely on-chain. We've worked very closely with the DYDX Foundation to optimize the distribution of liquidity incentives for market makers, using our platform to basically optimize and do the off-chain modeling there. So if those are the questions, layer 2s and kind of just economic optimizations, and we already do that, and it's something that we'd be very excited to support and introduce in the context of our work with MakerDAO.
Yeah, and that's my personal expectation, is that with L2, everything will become a lot more complex, and we might really bump into a complexity limit there that we can still deal with our existing testing infrastructure. And I would second that. That's the point where infrastructure like this may just become a necessity rather than a nice to have.
Wouter, I'll just jump in. Another thing that could be interesting and relevant, again, we need to look at the architecture and see how much of a focal point this is, but communication between Ethereum and other layer 2s, which is in terms of infrastructure, not trivial to kind of spin up, and something that we can spin up easily for developers that might want to test out these interactions before going live and deploying large sums of capital.
Yeah. All right. Well, seems that we've answered all the questions. It was great to see so much interaction. So yeah, thank you, Omer, Ben, and Max to come here and present the core unit. Next steps will be that people can reply to the forum thread that is already posted if they have any questions. And this presentation was recorded, so we'll make that recording available. And the last thing I want to repeat is that this core unit has an extended feedback period, because the team realizes this is not an obvious time to onboard a new core unit, and there is more time for feedback than is usually the case to maximize the potential of finding a good match that would work for the maker community.
100%. If you have any questions, I'm entirely available, either via the forum thread, which I just posted in the chat, or via DM. Happy to speak with anyone, set up calls for the community, for groups, for core units, whomever. So excited to continue this engagement and start working with y'all.
Likewise, Ben said it nicely, so I'll just chime in at the end. Anybody's welcome to reach out. I'll urge specifically anyone on the technical and engineering side to reach out. We've worked with SideStream, but we're interested in going much deeper with the rest of the core units and understanding what the hardest technical and engineering challenges are that we could solve with simulations to make the process faster and streamline it. So please don't be shy, reach out, Twitter, Instagram, on the forum, whatever's easiest, and we're looking forward to chatting.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you again next time.
Cheers.